Okay, Colin. Aloha. My name is Roger Jelinek. I'm Executive Director of the Hawaii Book and Music Festival. And it's my pleasure to introduce Kari Kēhau Noe. And I think you're in for a really interesting ride. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. This session is being recorded. It will be on Facebook simultaneously, and it will be up on the Better Tomorrow Speaker Series YouTube website. And eventually it will be in our Hawaii Book and Music Festival website for at least a year. So you will have access to it anytime. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Kari Kēhau Noe. Aloha.
Aloha. So hi everybody. Today I'm going to be talking about some of the work I do. So I'm going to jump into my slide deck really quick. So as it was said, I'm Kari Kēhau Noe. I go by both Kari or Kēhau, and I'm kind of explain that more when I go along with my presentation. But I'm originally from Kauai, Hawaii, and I have a couple different hats that I wear. So I recently started a digital media studio called Studio Ahilele, and that is a studio where I collaborate with a lot of different local entities and artists and create projects that usually have some kind of technological component within the project. But where I begun my journey in being able to do this kind of work is that I am currently a PhD student and a graduate research assistant at the Laboratory of Advanced Visualization and Application, so LAVA, at the University of Hawai'i Manoa. I've been at the University of Hawai'i Manoa since I was undergraduate, where I started as a dual major in computer science and in the Academy of Creative Media under the animation track. Other hats that I wear is that I also am a co-lead at the Emerging Media Lab called CreateX at the University of Hawaii at West Oahu's new Academy of Creative Media building. And I also collaborate on projects with the Office of Indigenous Innovation, which is a UH system-wide office, which is led by Kamuela Enos. So to explain all of this, basically how it can be thought of is that I kind of work under these different entities to basically answer the same type of question. And that question is, how do I leverage digital technology to tell a story that allows a user to learn through their own experience, investigation, and reflection in a way that is phono? So before I get into kind of like what I mean when I say in a way that is phono, I'm just going to kind of describe that under Studio Ahilele, that is my own company. And usually when I do work under Studio Ahilele, I'm credited as Kēhau Noe. And when I do work under academic projects, like under doing research under LAVA and CreateX, I go by Kari Noe, or I'm credited as Kari Noe. I found that once I started doing academic stuff, or doing academic presentations and such, I had a lot of like professors start to actually go into my personal social media and stuff, and so I wanted to separate it. So if you ever see any of these two names, both of them refer to me as my full name is Kari Kēhau Noe. But at Studio Ahilele, I collaborate a lot. As I said, I collaborate with a lot of others to create digital media and art projects about Hawaii, and I also work on some of my own artistic pursuits. And then under LAVA and CreateX, I work on projects that are funded through academic institutions, and I conduct research using emerging technology that typically isn't widely accessible to the public yet, just because it's still, as I said, emerging, or it's just not widely adopted by people because of X or Y, Z reason. So going back to what I mean is when I thinking through of how we can leverage digital technology that allows us to tell stories in a way that is phono, is that because I work a lot with Hawaiian ancestral knowledge, there is a responsibility that goes with that. So I just want to take the time to kind of describe that. So everything, whether the project is a research project or an artistic project, there are a lot of design and implementation considerations that I think through. So for instance, what are the visual and interactive, haptic, like what are all the different kinds of capabilities and experience that can be utilized with whatever topic that the project is covering? What is the overall goal of the experience? What certain technologies will be used? Where will it be accessed? Who will be able to access it? All these questions have to be answered in the design process of these projects. And going back to the utilization of ancestral knowledge, drawing, just the practice and the occurrence of drawing from one's own ancestral knowledge comes with a lot of responsibility, because you kind of also have to think of extra questions like, okay, are you actually using this ancestral knowledge and sharing it just to better yourself? Because there are cases in which, you know, because Hawaiian, I mean, we all are very familiar with how Hawaiian culture and Hawaiian language is used in a lot of businesses and such, where there's not, it's just kind of used just as it's interesting, it has an interesting flavor, it's just kind of like to interest people, but there's not actually a lot of, how do I say, meat to why they're actually utilizing or like calling on Hawaiian culture or language or knowledge. There's a constant question of when we design, or when I say we, I also am thinking through, like, again, going from a research background and just our own artistic pursuit background. When we think through of like this projects, we have to think of through like, how can these projects actually create equity in the community, especially in science and research. There's sometimes a big disconnect between like what scientists want to study, whether those questions are actually helpful to the community, and how the actual process and methodology of doing scientific research can honestly objectify Indigenous communities, and especially in Hawaii, can objectify Native Hawaiian communities depending on like the type of research and, again, as I said, their methodology. So we have to think through of like, how do we not cause harm in that way, and how do we actually create equity so it's actually a project that is wanted by and defined as needed by the community. And how do you protect and perpetuate that knowledge? So I've done had prior discussions and talks about like Indigenous data sovereignty. And when we go through, you know, there's kind of a conflict where we want to share a lot of knowledge, because our ancestral knowledge, because we want to perpetuate it. We want to be able to share it with future generations, but at the same time, it can be appropriated if given out too freely. So we're trying to find the balance in that. And actually, I think there's a talk today that is after mine where they also are talking about big data and how data has been used to help out local communities, but it's also good to be wary of how it can easily cause harm, especially when I think their topic is talking about health data. Health and genetic data are big things that can both easily help a community and harm them based on how the data is utilized and such. So overall, when doing this sort of work, the biggest skill is not just being tech savvy. I think anyone can be tech savvy if they spend the time doing it, but it's having the understanding of what are the proper questions to ask yourself before and during the design process of how basically what you're doing can do good by the community, but also meet your other things, that the reasons why you're doing it, whether it's an artistic project and there's something that you want to just artistically express, or if you are just trying to tell or perpetuate history, stories, and other narratives that come from, and again, my topic is revolving around Hawaii. So anytime I say from the community, I'm talking about our community here in Hawaii. So, and if you have this kind of practice, no matter how technologies change, because technologies change rapidly, this kind of thinking through can still apply. So I'm going to go now and talk about, again, the different hats I wear and the different projects that I've worked on. And as I go through, I think I'll be able, I'm going to click this really quick to see if it messes up. Okay, yes. I will be able to see any of your questions. So if there's any particular question on a particular project, I'll be able to answer. Also, I'm looking in the QA. I am sorry, I'm not looking at the camera just because of the positioning of my screen is it's hard for me to actually look at the camera and then make sure that I'm looking, my slides are good, but I'll try to look more at the camera. Mahalo. So the first part, first thing we talk about in more detail is Create X. Create X, as I said, let me leave these videos very quick. Create X is an emerging media lab at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, at West Oahu, I'm so sorry, in the new Academy of Creative Media building. So Create X was started as basically just a thought of trying, once they built the new Academy of Creative Media, and when I say they, I mean the project was headed by Chris Lee, who is the director of the Academy of Creative Media. And what Chris wanted is if you were able to see that building has like top of the line sound studio, it has Foley rooms, it has like all the technology a film student could love or like desire when they're learning. But Chris wanted to make space also for emerging media. And so he contacted Jason Lee, who is the director of Lava, which is the lab that I work at. And then Jason tasked me with trying to figure out like what could sort of emerging technology and what sort of overall kind of vision should we have for this space. So CreateX was born, and also my thesis project, which was this projector system. So this room in itself, each wall is about 27 feet in length. And so with our projector system, we're able to seamlessly project across each of these walls to create this immersive system. And we use different peripherals to create a more interactive environment. So one of the peripherals that are showcased here is a touch screen, so that can control the system that's working on the projector, but we also utilize peripherals like the Azure Connect, which is basically a camera used to do body tracking. So while you're in the room, the computer knows where you're standing, and we create different interactions based on that. So like if you go close to one of the walls, then we can have something like, I'll explain it later, but one of the birds are gonna fly near you, or those types of interactions. So the actual project that you're seeing being projected onto these walls is Valky'i. And that was also part of my thesis project. My thesis project, actually, I should mention, actually was answering the question of how do you design extended reality technologies for exhibition in ways that are equitable. So again, thinking through of like, instead of being more like how historically in early forms of museums, where it was kind of like almost a sensationalist showcasing of foreign objects and foreign artifacts from around the world, we want to think through of like, how do we create these exhibitions, essentially they're exhibits that showcase, for me particularly, I focus on Hawaiian culture in ways that are actually equitable. So one of the resulting of that when I was doing that research project was Valky'i. And also Valky'i was a way for me to test out the projector system as well. Valky'i, as you can see, what I'm doing right here is it's using different tiles to create a sentence. So I'm going to pause it very quickly. And so each of these tiles have a Hawaiian word or phrase. And by matching the tiles with the color, you're able to create a sentence. And so, for instance, throughout this video, I just created Lele Ka'iiwi Ha'oli. So, and that means just like the EEV, the happy EEV is flying. So what's particular that I just kind of wanted to look into how effective it was is not using an intermediary language, which means I didn't want to use English. Instead, I tried to make visual cues and visual components to be able, for someone who maybe didn't speak Hawaiian at all, to be able to then generate sentences that grammatically make sense, and that then through their own sense of play, so trying out different tiles, they can start to figure out what those words mean based on how the little character changes. So as it was just shown, I think I just moved Ha'oli to this, and the little bird started making like a happy face. So after you're able to manipulate the tiles to create your sentences, and you have your little character, the next thing you can do is you can move your character onto the actual wall. So this background, actually, there's another component to this. This background is Wainiha Valley on Kauai. So there's another aspect of this is that I wanted to be able to tangentially like showcase and teach about endemic species in Hawaii, so and basic environmental terms, but also have it related to the places that they actually are from. So Wainea Valley on Kauai, like in Kauai and on different islands, there are certain types of endemic species that you can find it other places, but you'll definitely find it there as well. And then also for different islands, since I had a focus on birds, there are some sorts of species of birds that you can only find on certain islands. So I was trying to keep that as well, so that when you're playing with the system, you also become familiar with where this endemic species actually is found. So overall, that is Valkyrie, and that is one of the first projects that we have at CreateX. Now, I want to talk more about the other projects that we have at CreateX, but right now, because of just research and and trying to get published, I can't share too much of the other projects that we are doing at the moment, but I'm hoping I can share it very soon. So I'm also just going to talk about at university, as I work there, I work on 2 different other projects, which is the Office of Indigenous Education, in which we collaborate together to work on EPSCoR project. And EPSCoR is basically a grant that helps serve I shouldn't say underdeveloped, under-researched, institutions that are not as competitive as other research institutions around the United States. And so Change Hawaii is this current EPSCoR project that we're working on at UH Mānoa. And that one is trying to develop tools and workflows to study and understand the threat of climate change in Hawaii. So how I relate to that is I'm working on basically parts of the team where we're thinking through of how do we improve the communication between scientists and the community, because often scientists, when they publish their data, sometimes it's not open, sometimes it's through visualizations or presentations or language that is not as accessible to the community, just because especially when you're like a environmental science or any kind of like biologist, or I find any of kind of natural science, there's a lot of different terminology that is not you wouldn't really come across it unless you're actually the scientist. So we're trying to develop systems to help bridge that gap so that more of relevant science data sets and research can be utilized by the community for their own purposes and understandings. And then the other project that I work on is with the UH Noe internship at Emilio Astronomy Center, which basically we're working with Navahi, which is a Hawaiian immersion school. And basically we're teaching high school seniors exhibition design and programming. So like programming in Unity, which is a game engine, to be able to create their own exhibitions at Emilio. So by the middle of next year, I believe, Emilio is going to have a system that's very similar to CreateX, where it's a projection system that I'm helping them develop. And these high school seniors will have developed an exhibit about Hawaiian night skies around that exhibit, and that using that technology. So I'm very excited and that's going to come out as a talk about that. But right now, the students are still in the middle of learning programming and exhibition design. So that will be something that I can share later. So that's kind of the breadth of the educational and academic side that I work on. So I'm going to talk more about what my studio does. And now as I said, a lot of times for my studio, it's just me, and I end up working on a lot of collaborations with different people on different projects. And the oldest one that was around even before I formed my studio, but we've been a team together, is the Kilohoku project, the Kilohoku VR project, which our development team, we call ourselves Wayfinding Interactive. And it consists of myself, Patrick Arjala, Anna Kink, and Dean Lotus. And overall, it's a virtual reality simulation to help train beginner navigators for non-instrumental, like modern Hawaiian wayfinding. So the focus of it is becoming familiar with celestial objects like constellations, particular stars, and how they relate. So how do they rise and set in relation to the Hawaiian star compass? And also just through being able to basically remember that process, they can simulate sailing across the ocean to test if they have developed that familiarity with the stars to be able to calculate their latitude based on the typical techniques that are used. So in the beginning, we worked with PBS, particularly Iolani Murphy, on the first version of this project, and that was created. So funny, I was talking to Anna and she pointed out it was like 6 years ago that this started, and I was still an undergraduate, and that was when our first version came out. And since then, we've kept on adding features and developing, and currently we are collaborating with Punahou School to create a new version that will be used in their navigation classes. So it's just been a lot of fun. And for this particular technology, it was a challenge to figure out, okay, we need to figure out how to make sure that it is related and like is a good replacement for for when the students need to study celestial objects, which, by the way, the purpose of this is not to replace actual like going out and studying the night sky. A lot of the times, and or at least in my own belief, the benefit of virtual reality is it's a supplement in the sense that for this is very useful for classes who, for instance, can't, for whatever reason, like their younger students can't meet at night. If they can meet at night, you know, it's never a clear night. Well, it can be a clear night, but sometimes it's not a clear night. And also just because of light pollution, especially if you live on Oahu, it's hard to see stars. So usually the remedy for that is then, oh, we'll go out on the va'a out and we'll go look at the sky. But then sometimes, since they're beginner navigators or beginner even just sailors, they can't go out on the water if it's rough. So then the other alternative is to go to, if Bishop Museum has the time, to go to planetariums to study. But even then, they can't have just like their own one-on-one like study session. So after all those things fail, Kilohoku VR is shown to be a very good supplement to being able for them to continue their study, so that they don't have to continuously wait for the perfect moment, the perfect opportunity. At any point, they can pick up a VR headset and they can go and they can study. So that was kind of like the intention and the purpose of why we continue to develop Kilohoku, is to provide that accessibility. And I'm going to go, and as I speak, a lot of the times when I design something and when I think through of like what kind of technology is used, I tend to lean towards immersive technology and extended reality technologies like virtual reality, because I think it's very good at providing accessibility. Now, of course, it's not good at accessibility if you're using technology that's too expensive, but in the sense that we can still create places or opportunities to house the technology so people can utilize it for projects like this that provides the accessibility of an experience that you could not have because of XYZ reason. So if anyone wants to learn more about Kilohoku, you can keep up with our work. We have a website, and I tend to also just post about updates that we've been going through. We're hoping to have a new version of Kilohoku out for the Oculus Quest 2 very soon. So also with my studio, I've been very fortunate to work with Bishop Museum multiple times. Typically, I work with Michael Wilson, who's one of the exhibit designers on their exhibition team. And they're one of the first projects that I worked with them is the Regenerations project. Now, Regenerations was an exhibition. The full name was Regenerations Challenging Scientific Racism in Hawaii. And the story behind that is that there was a anthropologist named, I just have to do this. Yeah, that's right. Louis R. Sullivan. And basically his whole research was that he was trying to measure, well, he was trying to take pictures of people and then measure their facial attributes. So like how long their face was, ears, eyes, that kind of thing. And he was trying to come up with basically a way to 100% tell that someone was of some ethnicity just based on measuring their face. And it was supported at the time, but now we know that this is very debunked science, and honestly, it led to a lot of racist interpretations about how basically if your face is measured in a certain way, you can then interpret that or make assumptions about people that are entirely untrue. But overall, this exhibit was Bishop Museum trying to both come forward and be like, because back in the day, Bishop Museum actually supported a lot of eugenicists like Louis R. Sullivan, and also so try to face that and talk about that history, but also try to frame that work in ways that can, again, the overall question of like, how can these certain exhibits be equitable? And one of the ways that they wanted to do that is that they asked me to help design a touchless database of all of the portraits that Louis R. Sullivan took. Now, the reason why it's touchless is because this exhibition came out in the middle of COVID. So they still wanted interactive projects, but they didn't want to have like to clean it all the time, or they were worried because at that time we didn't know COVID was airborne, have that danger of people touching a lot of things while they're visiting the museum. So the touchless database was actually created using a leap motion sensor. And a leap motion sensor basically is this little thing which has an IR sensor. An IR sensor basically can allow you to track body movements. It's also, when I mentioned the Azure Connect, it also has an IR sensor. And so if I'm going to go back to this video, if you pay close attention, there's going to be a little cursor, and that cursor is basically following the movements in my hand. And so by moving your hand around and using the gesture, you could act like a mouse, and you could select different things on the database. Now, the database itself, as I said, contains all the portraits that Louis R. Sullivan took. And now we try to reframe this project not as a way to just like try to figure out what everyone's ethnicity was, but as a way that we attached all of the portraits to place. That is, wherever the portrait was took, you can find out where their portrait is on the map. And the overall hope was that we would assume that they took the portrait around the place that they were living, because that's where Louis R. Sullivan just went around and just asked people around different communities if he could take their picture. So that if you had ancestors who, lived or had ties to this area, you could find the portrait of your ancestor. And in that way, in the 1920s, when this research was done, photography was uncommon as it is and as it is today. And actually these they're very good, very high definition photos. We wanted it to be able so that people could actually find their ancestors and then have access to being able to have these photos so that they can remember their ancestors and have this really cool memory of, their family, rather than it just being framed by his whatever scientific research. It can actually be something like a treasured family photo that you can share with future generations. And it's just very interesting to see like how people like dressed and how people are like in the 1920s, because that's 100 years ago. So that was Regenerations. That was very fun. It was kind of challenging working with the leap motion sensor because, again, it's one of these technologies that when you're working with uncommon technologies, in the sense that it's how do I say, it definitely is consumer grade, but it's still not something that is like as well developed as like, you know, using a computer mouse and keyboard in the case in which people know how to use it. It was challenging to come up with a simple interface that, you know, people could still try to approach and without any much instruction use. But overall, I think it was a fun exhibit. I actually got to see people try it out when it was being exhibited. And that was the first time I really got to see people try something that I created that wasn't in a research setting. And it was very cool to see everyone have fun trying to look around and see if they could find pictures of their ancestors. So I always think fondly of back on this project. Other project that I've done with Bishop Museum that actually is more current and actually still at Bishop Museum, not for very much longer because it's part of the Kaimahu exhibit, which is going to end soon, I think on the 15th. I forget. It's in the middle, it ends quite soon. And this is a project called the Living Stones at the Bishop Museum. So this is using a technique called photogrammetry. Now, photogrammetry is basically the basics of it is that you go and you take a bunch of pictures around an object. So I drew a little comic to explain this to a friend. And what it is that you go around and you take a bunch of pictures, and from all those pictures, you use an algorithm to stitch those pictures together and create a 3D mesh object. So the reason why I needed a 3D mesh object is that this was also Michael's idea, Michael Wilson, is that he designed this presentation area that used transparent film that could be projected on. And by putting it at an angle and projecting on it, it actually looks holographic. So I should say holographic, like a hologram. Holographic is kind of a different phenomena, technically. But overall, what I did was I went around to these different stones that are at Bishop Museum. And a lot of these are stones that were housed elsewhere. Like they're like they're ki'i that are from like I think most of them are from the Big Island, and they were moved due to reasons in which it's usually development. Someone's trying to develop in a site, and they're like, we either can give this to Bishop Museum, or we can give this to someone else, or it's going to get destroyed because they're developing the site. Or there are different reasons why someone just thought that it would be in better care of Bishop Museum. And so you can find these different stones around Bishop Museum. And I was able to scan them in, turn them into 3D models. And now you can go at that exhibit, see the 3D models and see the different contexts of where these stones came from and any other information that they know of. I think only one of the stones, this stone actually, we have a name for, which is Kapaheo. So it's very cool. If you do go to Bishop Museum and you do see these stones, make sure you are respectful to them. Like one of the things I always am worried about also when you kind of showcasing artifacts or something like this that are in public areas is, make sure you are respectful to them and you don't, you don't have to touch them or anything. Yeah, just make sure and appreciate them from a distance. So I'm thinking that one of the last things that I'm going to talk about is before we go on, and then we can ask more questions about the different process and everything of the things that I've talked about, is a collaborations that I do with two local filmmakers and artists, which is Santia Mialashiba Nash and Drew Broderick. And for them, I've been collaborating with them on different animation projects. I'll just loop these animations really quick. And so, as I said, one of my backgrounds is in animation as an undergraduate. So along with different technologies, thinking through of like creating software, I also do a lot of work in animation and that kind of narrative storytelling. And so this is just like a sample of a couple different shots from a project where basically we're relating different ololo no eau, or I shouldn't say relating, but
we're taking different Olelo Noeau and we're creating different animations that go along with the actual intention and meaning of the Olelo Noeau. So this I'm not going to speak too much into because it's still we're still in the works of getting it published. But I just wanted to showcase some of these animations because they're pretty cool. They're a lot longer than what's looping right now as well. But overall, from all of these projects that I shared, I wanted to just get a good kind of scope of all the kinds of technologies that I utilize and the different, and you kind of can see the different ways that different technologies serve either perpetuating or showcasing or educating on utilizing or using Hawaiian culture or ancestral knowledge. And so overall, this is kind of like the work that I do is very important to me. And as I said earlier, because it helps with accessibility. And when I'm usually asked the question of why do you how did you get started on this work? Why do you do these types of projects? Is that, well, a couple of reasons. One that I usually share is that I'm very concerned with accessibility because growing up, even just growing up on Kauai, you see the difficulty, and it's getting a lot better now. Now when I'm older, there's so many more things happening and growing that allow children and students to really learn from their own culture. But the example I usually give is that, I have cousins who moved to the mainland, and they moved because of the typical reasons of jobs are better, money goes farther, and that kind of thing. And it was really strange to see, because some of my younger cousins were little when they moved, and now they grew up away from Hawaii, and they still love Hawaii, but there's like a gap there because they weren't able to grow up with a lot of things that you get to grow up when you're here. And so developing these kinds of digital media projects in which we can still feel very connected no matter where we are in the world is very important to me, and is kind of the reason why I do a lot of these projects that I do. So with that, I'm just going to say a quick mahalo for listening to everything that I said, and allowing me to share a lot of these different projects. I also, there's my picture. There's that handle, Kēhau Noe. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram. You can also find Studio Ahilele at Twitter, Instagram as well. I want to give a quick plug to also, before we go to questions, there's another event that's revolving around Snaring New Suns, which is like an anthology of speculative works. I have a comic in there. I have another illustration in there that I collaborated with a different person on there, but I'm so excited to see all of everyone else's work because there's a lot of cool people that submitted and are being published in this book. So please, if you guys are interested, go check out this event as well. So mahalo, and then I think we can go to some questions in the last 15 or so minutes. Oh, Roger, I think you're still muted if you're talking.
Yeah, sorry. That's actually a Bamboo Ridge Press publication. It's not number 122. And it has, that event has a lot of really interesting people in it. It's quite crowded. Anyway, congratulations for being in it. I do have some questions. I'd like you to dig in a little bit further in any one of the main projects you described to really tell us how you actually do it. Because they look also smooth and finished, but I'm sure, because I have no idea how long it takes to do them. I mean, from your talk, it can't be altogether magical.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not like over the weekend I just did something like that. So it depends on the project. So I kind of, for something like Kilohoku, I kind of mentioned that it's been 6 years since the first iteration of it. And so a lot of these projects, we utilize is because a lot of them are interactive. We utilize game engines like Unity to create the project. So usually most projects, I think we get to our first prototype within like 6 months. I'm assuming usually the process is at first. If it's since it's usually a lot of the times I work with people. It's usually that someone has a project or interest in a project, and usually why they contact me is that I have technical skill of something that they want to try out. So like, oh, they want to do animations, and so they talk to me so that I can help them with the animations, or they want to do like the touchless database. They want to do something like that, so they contacted me. So usually there's a period of the initial like pre-production design where we're talking through, we're really laying out intentions for the project, because we want to make sure that, again, thinking through the question of how can we make projects equitable, how can we make sure that these projects are not extractive or anything like that. We go through this kind of like questioning and reflection, and just also because I'm working with other people, there's just having to create that relationship with whoever I'm working with, because, or like, you know, every project when you're working collaboratively, you want to create a good working relationship. So there's time spent there. And once it's all of this, when we have a clear vision of what the project could look like, then it goes into the production phase, which is usually an iterative approach where basically I make prototypes, I show them, they give input on it, and we go and so forth. So for Kilohoku and Wayfinding Interactive, I'm working with other programmers and computer scientists. So they go along with the iterative like programming process with me. And then we usually contact, like right now it's Punoho, before it was PBS. We contact whoever we're working with, and we meet, and we just make sure that as we go along the process, we're staying on course to our vision and our intentions that we set out in the beginning of the project. And then as we go along, we also have to, again, think through who can access it, how will it be accessed, so distribution and protections of like what is in the project or what is not. You know, there are certain things that we're covering that some things can be shared, but some things cannot be shared in certain contexts, because you would be better having the context given to by having someone being there. So for instance, in Kilohoku, there's not actually, like, if you played Kilohoku, there's not a lot of I should say the environment talking to you, in the sense that there's no character or there's no prompts that tell you how to do everything. Kilohoku was designed with in mind that a teacher should be there with you, helping you guide and teach you through the experience. And we did that because we wanted to make sure that proper context and was given to students while they're learning, rather than having just like the generic, this is a cow, it means north, or this is Hema, this is south, sort of thing. So it's just really thinking through of like, not just what we're going to just distribute and like when it goes, but also the context of like how it's going to be presented and in what ways it can be presented. So typically that's kind of the motion that we go through.
What are the, for instance, in the project that I think the last image was with a mountain range, what are the specific skills required to create that? This one. Yeah.
So this one? So different skills. So right. So this mountain range is actually, so for these animations, as you guys can see, that one is totally 3D, one is 2D, and this last one is a mix of 3D and 2D animation. So the island in the background is actually of Waimanalo. So that's the Ko'olau mountain range, like as if you were approaching from Waimanalo side. So how that was generated is that actually was generated through a process where you can take the height. So there's height data of from geographical height data that is published on various sites of different land features, so typically mountain ranges and such. And so what that essentially is that this you can take the height and you can basically how do I say, deform a plane, a 3D plane, to match the height data of a certain mountain range. So this is since that I was able to take the heights, I should just say the data set of the height of the Ko'olau mountain range, and then through an algorithm, so through a computer program and a process, able to generate this recreation of the mountain range. I think I then extruded it a little bit so it was a little bit more intense in the sense of how dramatic the heights were. But overall, using that process, you're able to get the shape of the mountain range so that it can be kind of recognizable to whoever's looking at it, if you're very familiar with the Ko'olaus.
Is that very accurate, the topography?
So it can be, but I extruded it a little, so I kind of stretched it a little bit out just so that it framed the shot a little bit better. But typically if you're working on something like a bit more scientific rather than looking for it to be visually appealing, that's the process that you can use to create a pretty accurate topography.
No, I'm interested because way back when I first came here in the early 90s, I came here to create maps, digital maps, because I had been involved with a scientific institution that was part of Columbia University, where they had just become interested in digital mapping because they were no longer getting huge block grants to send ships out to explore, so they actually had to manufacture the images. So I knew about that, and so I came to Hawaii to create maps, and I would refer to what you did there as vertical exaggeration. I did a map of Oahu, which was based on digital data, and then I had a very good graphic artist who had done all the graphic geological images for the Geological Museum in London, do a painting, and it was accurate to about 30 meters.
Oh, that's so cool.
And I wanted to give the viewer the experience as if they were driving past it. So you had to do a 2-to-1 vertical exaggeration to give that impression. When I tried that on Maui, it was ridiculous.
Oh yeah, it's not very, haleakala.
And also I wanted an angle on Maui that made sense, but making sense geographically doesn't make sense from a tourist point of view, because they're used to seeing Maui from one very specific angle. And then I flew a simulator, and had and I decided that I would show the map from 70 miles up from an angle looking down at the airport. And I also colored it entirely green, which is never possible in Hawaii at any one time. And I had the sun shining from a convenient direction, so that, and so on. So I realized how totally arbitrary most map making actually is. It's full of assumptions.
Yeah.
But as a commercial project, it never went anywhere because I had assumed that Japanese tourists would love a beautiful map, and in fact, they don't know which island they're on, and much less. Their idea of a map is a diagram with visitor attraction medallions on it. So I managed to lose a lot of money, but I have a very beautiful map of Oahu above my desk. That's almost as accurate as you are, but it has all the houses on it.
Yeah, no, I didn't want to have any building data just because of I didn't go into what the Noeau is, but I wanted the focus to be on the Ko'olau Mountains. And the funny thing I actually did is that when I did a preview of this shot, I posted it on social media, I think Instagram, and I asked hey, can anyone recognize this mountain range? And it was fun to see that I would also just ask people and show them and see, because I always wonder when you take all of the other things away, like, you know, the buildings and everything, can we still recognize the shape of the mountains? And most people were able to be like, oh yeah, that looks like the ko'olau. And I was thinking, I'm like, you know, I mean, growing up in Hawaii, you get so used to seeing the same, you know, the shape of the mountain range that even if it doesn't have the usual look to it, because also I just retextured this to have kind of like a paisley, just greens, blues, and such. I thought it was kind of interesting that we can still recognize our mountains just because even from other angles, we can kind of seem to still get the sense of it. So
Actually, the most dramatic mountains on Oahu are on the west side.
oh yeah, Ka'ala and all them.
But from a tourist point of view, they're not that attractive because they're always just brown. You know.
It's too hot over there for them.
But my map was the first to integrate the seafloor topography with land. And
That would be cool.
So I got interested in doing a map of all the islands, which including the seafloor data. And the seafloor topography is quite unattractive because there's nothing growing on it.
Oh yeah, it's just the ocean.
It looks like somebody threw mud against the wall. You know?
But wouldn't it be kind of cool to show, like, I don't know if this is a fact, I might be misremembering, but isn't like Mauna Kea actually one of the tallest mountains if you took like the seafloor to consider the seafloor topography?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that would have been cool. I think that would have been cool to see or like visualize.
Anyway, that was my adventure in that direction. But I'm fascinated by what you're doing. Okay, I think we can probably bring this to a close. And thank you very much for really illuminating an excellent talk. And I wish you all success with your future projects. I'm quite sure I'll be calling you again in the future.
Yeah, I hope I have much more to share about, especially about the projects that I could only mention I couldn't show anything about yet, quite yet.
All secret, yes. Okay, well, attendees, thank you very much for coming. And I just have one final message. We hope to be back in person at UH Mānoa in 2023. And to that purpose, it takes a lot of funding to put an in-person event on. So we're going to have a fundraiser in January the 26th. Please put that in your calendar. And I will be reminding everyone endlessly through this month and beyond. Again, thank you very much. And Kari, and I really enjoyed the talk.
Yeah, mahalo for inviting me, and I'm glad that it was interesting enough that I hope everyone who hears it gets something out of it.
Absolutely. Aloha.
Aloha.